If I told you that someone very close to you is going to lie to you today, and the scary part is, you might smile, nod, believe them, without even realizing it, would you believe me? The uncomfortable truth is that most people do not lose because they are naive. They lose because they listen to words, but fail to see what is happening underneath those words. They believe the story being told without realizing that the body, the eyes, the timing of the reaction, and the way the other person avoids certain things are what actually give the truth away. And once you cannot see that, you are living among false stories while still thinking you see everything clearly. If you have ever trusted the wrong person, comment 1. If you are starting to feel like this video is describing exactly what you have been through, comment 2. The most dangerous thing is not when a stranger lies to you. The most dangerous thing is when it is someone you know. A close friend lying about where they went, a partner lying about who they are texting, a coworker lying about why they forgot their part of the work, a boss lying about why your project was rejected. You do not stay alert because you think, this person would never go that far. But that is only the surface. The truth no one wants to admit is, everyone lies sometimes. The issue is not that the world has liars in it. The issue is whether you are sharp enough to notice it before you become the one who pays the price. And this is where everything starts to change. Because spotting a lie is not some guessing game. It is not about seeing someone blink too much and deciding they are dishonest. It is not that simple. Liars do not always shake. They do not always stutter. They do not always avoid eye contact. In fact, some liars are extremely calm, extremely smooth, extremely natural. That is why so many people get fooled, not because they are stupid, but because they are using the wrong way to look at the truth. But what comes next is what has allowed many people to get manipulated for years. The biggest mistake most people make is asking questions that are too easy. They ask things like, did you go anywhere yesterday? Did you two talk? Did you do that? Questions like that open the door too wide for a lie to walk right in. Because all someone has to say is no, and it is over. Too clean, too simple, too safe. Liars love those kinds of questions because they leave so many places to hide. But sharp people do not ask like that. They do not ask to hear an answer. They ask to force the other person to reveal how they react. Instead of asking, did you go out last night? They ask, what made you get home late last night? It sounds like only a few words changed, but in reality, it changes everything. Because now, you are no longer giving the other person a choice between yes and no. You are putting them in a position where they have to explain. They have to create details. They have to connect the pieces. And that is exactly where liars start getting into trouble. Because telling a one-word lie is easy. But telling a lie with context is much harder. Just think about it. When someone is telling the truth, they are simply remembering what happened. But when someone is lying, they have to build a brand new story on the spot. They have to think about what to say, what to leave out, what detail to emphasize so it sounds believable, what detail to avoid so they do not contradict themselves. Their brain is not just answering. Their brain is defending itself. And that is why the right question can make a lie begin to crack within the first few seconds. If you have ever heard an answer that somehow felt more wrong the longer you listened to it, comment 1. Because that feeling is not always irrational. Sometimes it is the first signal. But no one tells you this. The most important part is not the content at first. It is the first 5 seconds. Yes, just the first 5 seconds after you ask the question. That tiny window is where the body betrays a person the fastest. After 5 seconds, a liar has had time to patch the mask back together. They have had time to choose their words, time to adjust their face, time to make their voice sound more normal. But in those first few seconds, the truth often slips out before they can control it. Look very closely in that moment. Do not just listen. Watch. Do they touch their face? Do they swallow in an unusual way? Do they glance away for a split second before looking back? Do they pause too long on a very simple question? Does their voice suddenly change tone? One sign alone is not enough. One sign means nothing by itself. Anyone can be tired. Anyone can be confused. Anyone can forget. But if 2 or 3 signs appear together, in that first reaction window, it is no longer random. That is when you should stop trusting words completely and start observing the person. But this is what really sharpens your ability to read people. Never decide someone is lying just because they look down or speak slowly, because maybe that is simply how they always are. If you want to catch what is unusual, you first have to know what is normal. That is why good observers do not rush to conclusions. They quietly create a baseline in their minds. When this person is relaxed, do they speak fast or slow? Do they smile often or stay serious? Do they usually look straight ahead or off to the side? Do they speak with their hands or sit still? Once you know someone's normal state, every change becomes obvious. This is where many people miss it. They look at one isolated moment and judge it. But the truth is not in one gesture. The truth is in the change. A person who normally speaks smoothly suddenly hesitates on one specific question. A person who normally looks you in the eye suddenly starts avoiding eye contact when a certain detail comes up. A person who normally speaks with certainty suddenly switches to words like maybe, I guess, or probably. That shift away from normal is the real alarm bell, and once you understand that, you stop getting fooled by surface-level acting. But what comes next is even more dangerous. Some liars prepare very carefully. They do not just think of an answer, they think of how to tell it. They know how to act natural. So how do you break through that layer? The answer is, do not ask only once. Come back to the same issue from a different angle. It is a very simple trap, but an extremely powerful one. A truthful person remembers the event. A liar remembers the script, and scripts fall apart easily when they are tested again. For example, the first time you ask, "You went to the movies yesterday, right?" Then later, after the conversation is moved on, you ask, "What time did the movie end yesterday?" If the person is telling the truth, they just have to remember what happened. But if they are making it up, now they have to remember what story they built earlier. And the more fake layers they create, the harder it becomes to keep everything consistent. Liars usually do not collapse on the first question. They collapse on the second or third, when they have to keep all the pieces matching. You will start to see the gaps clearly. At first they say they went. Later they say they never actually went inside. At first they say they went with a friend. Later they say they went alone. Those tiny cracks are where the truth starts to show. If you are beginning to understand why some stories sound smooth, but still make you feel uneasy, comment 2. Because sometimes the issue is not that the story lacks detail. It is that it has too many details placed there on purpose. And speaking of details, there is one signal many people ignore. Weak words. Words that make a statement sound like it is standing on thin ice. Maybe, I think, probably, kind of, I guess. It seemed like they sound harmless, but in many important situations, these are escape routes liars build into their own statements, because if they get caught later, they can instantly back away. I never said that for sure. I only said maybe. I did not say I was certain. Of course, not everyone who uses soft language is lying. Some people are just careful. Some people do not want to sound too certain and be wrong. But notice this difference. When someone truly knows something clearly, they usually sound much more direct. I was home. I called him at 8. I did not see that person. But when they keep covering their words in fog, especially in places that should be clear, you need to start asking questions, not accusing, but questioning. Because sometimes liars do not hide behind silence, they hide behind vagueness. But that is not all. There is a moment that is very easy to spot when the other person starts feeling danger. It is when they change the subject. You are asking about something very specific, and suddenly they pull the conversation somewhere else. They mention a funny video, another person, an old memory, a completely unrelated issue, or worse, they turn it around and start questioning you so they can take control of the conversation. That is not always proof of lying. but very often it is avoidance. Their brain understands that if they stay on this topic for a few more minutes, the chance of slipping up gets higher. So they need to steer away. What you need to do is not get angry, not jump into accusations, just calmly bring them back. Yeah, we can talk about that later, but going back to what you said, hold on, I still want to understand that part. Okay, but first answer this part for me. A truthful person usually will not get too upset about being brought back, but someone hiding something will often start showing impatience, irritation, or defensiveness, and that is when you see very clearly the issue is no longer just the content. The issue is that they are trying to escape, and here is the move that throws a lot of lies off rhythm. Interrupt them in the middle of the story and ask them to go back to a detail from earlier. It sounds simple, but it is incredibly effective. When someone is telling the truth, they are walking through memory. If you pull them backward, they simply return to that point. But when someone is telling a false story, they are walking on a constructed line. If you interrupt them, they have to keep holding the part they were telling, go back to patch the earlier part, and make sure it all still fits. That is a huge cognitive burden, and that is exactly when hesitation, inconsistency, awkward pauses, or self-corrections start to appear. For example, the person is talking quickly. I went there, then I met my friend. Then after that, and you cut in. Wait, before you left, where were you? A truthful person usually goes back and answers naturally, but a liar is more likely to freeze. Because they did not prepare for that turn. They only prepared for the straight road. And this is what many people do not know. Liars are usually not weak in the parts they choose to tell. They are weak in the transitions, the connecting pieces, the moments where the direction suddenly changes. That is where a false story breaks most easily. But the last thing is the most dangerous of all. There is one trap that feels almost ruthless, but it is extremely effective. Deliberately insert one wrong detail into the conversation, just one small detail. Then watch how they react. For example, you say, "Oh right, it was raining that day, wasn't it?" Even though they never mentioned rain. If they are telling the truth, there is a good chance they will correct you immediately. No, it was not raining. Because truthful people stay anchored to reality. So when a wrong detail enters the story, they naturally want to fix the map. But liars are different. They are often afraid to correct you, because they fear that if they push back the wrong way, the whole story they built will shift out of place. So they are more likely to go along with it. Yeah, just a little rain. Or they glide past it like nothing happened, and that moment is extremely valuable. Because you have just seen something important. This person is not protecting the truth. This person is protecting the story. And that is the mental shift many people need to hear. You think the problem is how to catch one lie? No. The deeper issue is this. A truthful person tries to keep the facts accurate. A liar tries to keep their image from collapsing. Those are two completely different goals. One side is holding on to the truth. The other side is holding on to the survival of the mask. Once you understand that, you will stop listening only to what they say. You will start watching what they are trying to protect, the truth or the performance. That is why truly aware people do not rush to judge based on one signal. They do not hear one pause and immediately conclude dishonesty. They do not see one sideways glance and slap on the label of liar. They gather pieces. They observe patterns. They notice changes. They ask again in a different way. They bring the other person back to the unclear point. They test consistency. They watch how the person reacts when an uncomfortable area is touched, and when enough pieces appear, they know what they are dealing with. If you have ever been deceived, not because the other person was too smart, but because you trusted a story that sounded reasonable too quickly. Comment 1. If after this video you are starting to understand that spotting lies is not about vague intuition, but about deliberate observation. Comment 2. If you want me to keep making videos like this to help you read people more clearly, understand situations faster, and avoid being manipulated in everyday life, like and subscribe right now. And trust me, this is only the beginning, because there are still many dangerous signals that most people keep missing every single day.